The content presented in this podcast is based on real events and may contain graphic descriptions of violence, sensitive topics, and explicit language that may be triggering, offensive, or sensitive subjects to some viewers and listeners. Discretion is advised. The purpose of this podcast is to explore and discuss true crime cases for entertainment and educational purposes only. This podcast does not intend to glorify or sensationalize crime, but rather aims to analyze and understand the complexities of human behavior in the criminal justice system. We encourage listeners to approach this content with empathy, critical thinking, respect for the victims and their families. Tonight, we're diving deep into a case that challenges everything we think we know about justice, truth, and the power of a cold case to unravel lies. It's a story of tragic murder, a family's darkest secret, and an innocent man condemned for a crime he insists he didn't commit. Our focus is on the book Submerged, How a Cold Case Condemned an Innocent Man to Hide a Family's Darkest Secret by Hillel Levin. This isn't just a tale of murder, it's a haunting exploration of how evidence can mislead, justice can fail, and how the truth often lies hidden beneath the surface. So pour yourself a glass of your favorite vintage, and let's uncover the chilling twists and turns of this extraordinary case. You won't want to miss this one for a second. It's time to start the show. Let's hit it. Hi, welcome to another episode of Mysteries, Mayhem, and Merlot. I am your host, Winnie Schrader, and tonight I wanted to talk about this case because I came across the book, and being a parent, especially of teenagers, it is kind of unnerving to have your teenagers have a life outside the home and have jobs and things. Um, but when you expect your son or daughter to come home after work, and they don't, and you can't get a hold of them. Even this day and age when we have cell phones, but back in 1993, Rayna Rison didn't have that opportunity because it was 1993. We didn't have the technology, but she left work and all of a sudden she just disappeared. Nobody knew what happened to her. And a month later, she was found. So that's why I wanted to get author uh, Hillel Levin, who wrote the book Submerged, How a Cold Case Condemned an Innocent Man to Hide a Family's Darkest Secret. Welcome to the show, Hillel.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Yeah, this case really intrigued me because as I was reading the description of the book, what caught my eye was there was so much dark and deep characters going on when it just seems like it's just kind of an abduction case and murder, abduction, kill on the surface, but it goes a lot deeper than that. And I was kind of shocked of how this case went about and how things were missed. So if you want to get us started on, I guess, a little bit of Rayna and the day that she went missing.
Sure. Rayna was 16 and a really good student, somebody with a bright future, anxious to go to college. So she had 3 jobs, and her plan ultimately was to be a veterinarian. So one of those jobs was after school, she'd be what they call the kennel girl at a veterinary hospital in LaPorte, Indiana, which is northwest Indiana. Kind of the closest big city is South Bend, where Notre Dame University is. And she got off of work at about 6 o'clock, and she happened to be the last one there. And she was seen by a couple of witnesses driving by. It was right on kind of a main drag in LaPorte, uh, in what they thought was a confrontation when she
Okay.
was abducted. Um, Another witness saw her lean into a car with her feet off the ground and actually thought the opposite, that she was giving someone a kiss inside the
Okay.
car. And then she never went home. And she was someone who was uh, very considerate of her parents. If she was ever going anywhere unexpected, she
Hmm.
let them know. And furthermore, at home, which was about a mile away, was her boyfriend. And
Okay.
they were about to have what they thought was going to be a big makeup date every year around, this is March now, in 1993. He would become really busy at basketball. He was like the manager of the high school team. And she would
Okay.
get very frustrated that he wasn't around. So they were going to have a makeup date. And here he is waiting for her, and she never comes home. And as you said, there was like a massive search. I mean, that is what
Hmm.
happens when teens are abducted and disappeared. It was later that
Hmm.
night at about 10:30 that her father put in a missing person report to the police department. And then some very important things happen in terms of the evidence. Is her car is spotted about 9 miles north of downtown LaPorte on this gravel country road where the
Hmm.
dwelling was a trailer. And that was by 7, which was really crucial in terms of figuring out the case. And how do they know it was by 7? It was spotted by a mother and her 2 children who almost hit the car, because it was another important element of the story, is it was so foggy. It was, in fact,
Okay.
a policeman said, the foggiest night he can remember. And, you would suddenly see this car with its hood open, and there were a couple of men near that car. But this woman got home in time for her kids to see the last couple of minutes of their favorite show, Married with Children. So
Okay.
Married with Children is really crucial to the timeline of
Yes.
the story. But she is nowhere to be seen, and she is not found for another month in a pond about a couple of miles west of where the car was abandoned, and again 9 miles northwest of where she was abducted, and she's
Okay.
submerged in that pond. And again, the circumstances surrounding her discovery are pretty screwy too. Um,
Okay.
so there are a lot of little clues here that it does sound like you said, I think very accurately, this is kind of a simple abduction, killing, murder, but all these big mysteries hung over that early investigation, um,
Yeah.
that were not closed.
Yeah. Okay. So now, when they found her, was there any type of evidence to dictate who could have, I mean, like anything other than obviously with the autopsy, they found out that she died of strangulation, that they
No,
found,
not true.
oh,
Not
that is
true.
not true.
No,
How did,
no. Again, you're
with,
looking at all this stuff that is baloney on the web,
oh,
and that's
wow.
what my
Well,
book
tell us.
dispels. Yeah, absolutely. Um, well, we'll talk about the prime suspect in a second. There was a
Okay.
real prime suspect who did very suspicious things. But
Hmm.
and remember, there's a month between her abduction and her discovery. So
Yeah.
this is kind of the preliminary investigation. And what I found so valuable about the case in terms of reporting on crime is, usually we're reporting on it when we're working for a newspaper or magazine in real time. So
Mhm.
things happen and develop after you're already looking at it, and sometimes it takes years for certain evidence to come out. And here with this book, I had it all. I had more than 1,000 pages of police files, so I can see exactly how the investigation proceeded. But
Mhm.
in terms of her discovery, she's submerged under a couple of big tree limbs in this
Okay.
pond. Pond
Mhm.
is not very deep, and it's not even really a pond. If you look at a map, you don't see that it's designated as any kind of waterway. It was really a swamp that just collected water more and more over the passing years. Um,
Gotcha.
but the most important, I mean, there are certain aspects of how she was in the pond really important for your forensic pathology fans. To the lay people, when they pulled the body out, it was bloated, so bloated, the pants were about to burst through the seams of what she had,
Oh,
and her face was unrecognizable, kind of like a Cabbage Patch doll.
yeah.
Okay, but someone who is familiar with forensic pathology, with taphonomy, taphonomy is
Mhm.
is understanding the state of decomposition. They would say, "Well, wait, she was in there a month, but bloating happens. It's like the first stage of decomposition. 5 days typically when a body is on the ground."
Yeah.
So she was kind of in a refrigerator in cold water in March. And that shows you
Wow.
how much her body was preserved. So that when they did the autopsy, a forensic pathologist was subcontracted out of South Bend who worked for the local coroner. He did it. He said there are no signs of physical trauma. No, nothing on the skin, nothing on the neck, no broken blood vessels, none of the signs of physical trauma. In fact, he was so definitive that when the police sent evidence for further examination to the FBI in Washington, D.C., the evidence technologist said there are no signs of beatings or strangulation or of beatings typically associated with strangulation in this kind of
Oh,
in death. So this was a huge mystery of was
right.
the cause of death that they never figured out. I have figured it out.
Oh, you?
I don't know if
Okay.
we want to get into it, but it's a real spoiler. But bizarre as it sounds, because my previous book was about a serial killer, I immediately realized how she died. And that helped me connect it to the killer.
Yeah, we'll definitely have to talk about that here down the road on the show. But so when they,
So you have that bizarre thing
uh-huh,
hanging over it, and when the police and the coroner first give their um, explanations, they're just all over the place. And the ultimately the fallback, and again, this gets very graphic, but the skin when it's underwater that time,
yeah,
it turns into what they call washerwoman skin.
mhm,
Very white, very, it looks like it's going to actually be able to be pulled right off the body. Um,
yeah,
so she had the washerwoman skin, but again, he would have noted a bruise. He would have noted a cut. He would have
yeah,
noted contusions, related to beatings and strangulation. Now, later they would try and argue, young women of that age, sometimes that bone in the neck, it's called the hyoid bone, doesn't
mhm,
break. It's very pliable on some young women that age
yeah,
during strangulation. But you have all the signs on the neck, you have the
Yeah.
bruising, you have petechiae, they call it, little vessels that get broken in the eyes. Um,
Hmm.
and then you have someone like that, especially a younger, uh, she wasn't athletic in any way. She's defending herself. There are bruises up and down the arm. It doesn't take much for someone who's beating and strangling you to create bruises, in this part of the arm. None of that.
Yeah.
Absolutely none of that. And
That
and
is very strange.
and that flummoxed the police
Yeah.
and the forensic pathologist. Um, and they would later say, well, maybe that was decomposition. All these things kind of disappeared
Yeah.
because she was in there. And the police chief kept saying that. Well, if we hadn't pulled her out after a month, we would have found all these things out. Again, she wasn't that decomposed.
Right.
And decomposition would not wipe away all of those signs of evidence, like, you know, uh, scrapes, contusions, bruises. No, that wouldn't have
Right.
happened. So that was a big mystery. That was one of the big mysteries that hung over this case. Now, the prime suspect was her brother-in-law, her oldest sister's husband. His
Oh,
name
okay.
was Ray McCarty, Raymond McCarty.
Okay.
Uh, he was 11 years older than Rayna.
Okay.
Her sister was, I think, 7 or 9 years older than she was. Maybe it was 7. But the sister, the family dynamics are really important here. She had 2 grandchildren at this point. She kind of ruled the family growing up, very bossy. Her mother was more of a laid back person. The father was a real character, very much in the news when his daughter was abducted, not afraid of the press.
Hmm.
Kind of everyone felt a character.
Hmm.
But this sister, her oldest sister Lori, really ruled the roost.
Hmm.
Okay. But I don't want to skip over this. There's a second, even more bizarre mystery. So they don't know how she's dead, but even worse, right near where the car was abandoned, like
Okay.
literally around the corner at 9:50 p.m. Okay, so I had said she was abducted probably around 6:10.
Yep.
Her car was abandoned. We know it's 7, because of the woman and her 2 sons
Hmm.
dead. As far as the police are concerned, she's dead by then. So now
Okay.
at 9:50, this patrolman in a squad car who works for the county, he's a sergeant. He's not a rookie. He's a guy who's been doing this a while.
Yeah.
He's getting ready to go to work, and this 2 cars, a car and a truck, pass him, and driving at the wheel of that car, he tells and swears to everyone, is Rayna Rison.
Really?
And he knows from the curls, she had very curly hair. He could see that, and the high cheekbones. But most important, she's wearing her boyfriend's Letterman jacket, which was oversized Letterman jacket.
Okay.
It was partly leather. It had
Hmm.
orange. He also had badges from playing in the marching band, on
Oh,
top of
okay.
managing the basketball team. And he saw the black sleeve, the orange patches at
Hmm.
9:50. Very
Okay.
experienced guy, and all the detectives say to him, "This was wishful thinking. There is no possible way you saw her driving the car in that jacket. No way." And that jacket became really famous because Uh, she was abducted on March 26th. On April 1, America's Most
Uh-huh.
Wanted devoted a segment to her being missing. And the
Uh-huh.
thing they most focused on was she was wearing her boyfriend's Letterman jacket. So she's, 5'6", she's got curly hair, and she's
Right.
wearing this jacket, and they put the jacket on the screen. This was like the biggest thing they had other than her pictures from her prom to show what she looked
Hmm.
like. So that
Right.
was this other crazy mystery. But the answer to both of these mysteries would have solved the crime. Instead,
Okay.
the detective said to the patrolman, "You just wished you saw her. That was wishful thinking. You did not really see her. She was dead at that point. No way was she alive." So you had those two big mysteries, but you had one big solution as far as the police were concerned. And they had interviewed hundreds of people by the time she had at least 200 interviews by the time the body was found,
Okay.
some of them more than once. And they found out that 3 years before, when Rayna was 13, she had gone in for an abortion in South Bend, and the man who impregnated her was her brother in law, Ray McCarty.
What?
And he had, um, would later tell people it just happened one night, and, you know, she was kind of enticing him. But he later revealed he had had sex with her dozens of times when she was over the house babysitting for the two little children, her niece and
Oh, no.
nephew, and she loved them. I mean, that's
Yeah.
another element. This was such a good kid, and she just loved those kids. And this brother in law was a physically violent guy.
Mm-hmm.
The whole reason he met her sister was he had to flee his hometown after he stalked a young woman and beat up her boyfriend when she wouldn't date him again. So he was a very aggressive, physically
Yeah.
individual, and she let people know she was scared of him. But he had ultimately impregnated her, and when she had that abortion, the clinic forced her to tell the police who did it. Um,
Okay.
and the brother-in-law admitted to it.
You
Okay,
admitted to it?
he admitted to it,
Oh,
which was a good thing because the clinic lost the semen. I mean, and the fluids that to identify, but he admitted to it.
yeah.
But then he would tell people that she enticed him, and she wanted it as much as he did, and the family started to agree with him,
What?
and they would call it an affair.
Come on, you gotta be kidding
So
me.
they wouldn't call it her molestation. They wouldn't call it her rape. They wouldn't call it a statutory rape. They would say it was mutual. And
She was 13.
older sister would ultimately, at first, was outraged by it, but then started blaming her sister for enticing him and calling him worldly. Okay,
Oh
now
my
an
God.
important part of the story is that when the father went into the police because the clinic said you got to say who did this.
Uh-huh.
He did not go in with Rayna. He went in with her sister, the wife of the abuser. And the
Oh.
police said, "Well, we got to have the victim." And the
Yeah.
sister was, "No, we'll tell you what happened. I'm so upset that he did it, and blah, blah, blah." And the police were, "No, we have to have the victim here. You can't
Yeah.
tell us what happened." And the father was, "Well, she's still recovering from the procedure of the abortion and all the trauma that went with that." So then they force
Oh.
Rayna into the police station, and with the detective, this becomes really important later.
Yeah.
You talk about Jason's trial with a detective and her parents. She says he would do this to me. She goes into very graphic detail over how it all, the initial touching and all of that that ultimately led to intercourse. He would say, "If you ever tell, I'll kill you."
Okay.
Okay, and then she signed that statement with the proviso above her signature that you're making the signature with the belief this is to the truth to the best of your knowledge. And
Right. Right.
her parents signed as witnesses, and of course the detective signed. Okay,
So
but
okay, so they have a
well,
document
they have
stating
this document.
somebody.
Okay,
Okay.
we'll talk about this later.
Okay.
So, as far as she's concerned, this was not an affair that she wanted, right? And there
Right.
are letters I have that she later wrote to the sister and her boyfriend that indicate this was no way that she was a willing participant in that.
Mhm.
But the family begs the judge, don't send him to prison. And the judge gives him 3 years probation
Um,
and says, but you have to take sex offender treatment,
mhm.
which typically involves individual therapy and group therapy. Both are important. And
Mhm.
you can't be allowed anywhere near not only Rayna, but there was a third, the youngest of the three sisters. There were three sisters. Rayna was in the middle. Her youngest sister is Wendy.
Mhm.
And you can't, he can't be near them without
Oh,
supervision
gotcha.
of any
Okay.
kind. So that was what was required for him to get the probation. Well, the whole and he goes in for an assessment, and that psychologist said, although I think she was a clinical social worker, she said, no, he actually he can't even be near his own children. That's how alarmed she was when she interviewed him and
Wow.
heard how he characterized the molestation. So now he goes into a program and he totally rejects treatment. He says
Okay.
the only victim is me because I have to come here and listen to you.
Oh,
And when he goes into group therapy, he starts saying things like, "There's nothing wrong with this. She wanted it as much as I did. My friends would have done it too." And they threw him out of the individual therapy and the group therapy. And then the probation officer went to a second program, and that program director said, "You just have to keep your mouth shut. Just come to the group therapy, keep your mouth shut, and we'll let you, qualify." He wouldn't even do that. So he gets the thrown out of two programs, and the head of the program writes the probation officer because this is breaking probation.
mhm.
And
Yeah.
the judge had said, you don't go through these programs. You go back. You go to jail or prison.
Okay.
So the head of that program wrote the probation officer and said he has a kind of mindset that he's going to offend again.
Right.
The
And
probation
well,
officer
yeah.
did, the probation officer did not respond, and they let him finish out that 3 years without going to a real program. And guess what? He starts assaulting Rayna again when she's 16. And she tells her best friends that he's doing it again. She tells Jason Tibbs is one of her best friends. They were briefly platonically boyfriend and
Yeah.
girlfriend in the seventh grade.
Yeah.
Jason really liked her, and when it looked like she was, breaking up with her other boyfriend, who was much more a good student, and they were both in the marching band. They had a lot more in common. His
Yeah.
name was Matt. When it looked like she was breaking up with Matt, he wrote her a love letter in the freshman year saying, "I'm here if you're ready. You were
Yeah.
the best thing that ever happened to me." Jason was really kind of a guy from the other side of the tracks, much smarter than people gave him credit for, but he still remained this close friend. And Rayna
Hmm.
even told her coworker at the veterinary hospital, "The one person I think will ever protect me is Jason."
Okay.
Um, she didn't say protect me against my brother-in-law, but she said to that coworker, "I see Jason as my protector." And she said to Jason, "He's doing it again." And Jason's mother was involved with law enforcement at that point, and he said, "I'm just going to tell my mother." And she said, "No, no, I'm going to handle it." And a week later, she's gone. Um,
Wow.
Now, what was their motive? She
Hmm.
and the sister got into a big fight, like a big fight, on the front lawn of the parents' house,
Okay.
and she slapped the older sister slapped Rain in the face. And during that confrontation, Raina's sister Lori later told a friend she told her, "I'm taking pregnancy tests."
Oh,
So if Ray had made her pregnant again, he would not have gotten probation. He would not have gotten a slap on the wrist. And this is now, uh, you know, attitudes had really started to change,
yeah.
especially with the whole Catholic priest crisis and all of that stuff about child molestation by
Right.
93. He would have gone away for at least 10 years, if not more.
Hmm.
So, as far as the police were concerned, when they found this out, he was their prime suspect. They had the motive, um, and they had also, learned a lot even before she was found about um, places in the beginning he had said to them, "I wasn't anywhere near the veterinary hospital. I went
Yeah.
down south of Laporte, like 9 miles south. He had where he grew up, a place called Union Mills. So he had a friend there who was kind of a father figure to him, who
Okay.
had a hog farm. So it was like I was down there feeding the hogs. He was out of town. I was doing him a favor. Okay.
Okay.
He drove a very recognizable car. I call it the spotted car, not just because people spotted it, because it was spotted with all these bright orange rust spots on a very
Oh,
light blue body. So it was a
gotcha.
spotted car, and he had a bad muffler. And so it was spotted a half hour before her abduction on the street that ran perpendicular into the dead ended on the
Hmm.
veterinary hospital. So now he changes it and says, "Well, I was there to um, see a house for sale on that street. That's why." So now he's there. He's not south. And then later it would change again that he was driving north, and he was going to reclaim a debt or pay off a debt in South Bend. And he picked up a woman, a hitchhiker, and he never told that story because he thought his wife would be mad at him for doing that.
Oh my
But
God.
he kept changing over and over. And they even caught him at one point grooming another 16-year-old girl.
Oh gosh.
So,
Why didn't they just lock him up? I mean, seriously.
okay.
It's
So
oh,
here's
frustrating.
the okay. So why didn't they?
Yes.
Number one, this cause of death thing. Okay.
Okay.
Number two, he now I discovered there were witnesses who identified him with Raina's car. One remarkable witness. I mean,
Okay.
a lot of eyewitnesses, screw things up because of
Yeah.
trauma of just witnessing a violent event or don't remember well. This was like one of the most amazing witness identifications I've ever come across in my whole career. It slipped through the cracks. I never got it. So I'm like one of the first people to really recognize what they had in their hand. Uh,
Okay, well, we gotta take a quick break.
okay,
I definitely wanna know what this eyewitness saw because if it's that detailed, that means that something probably caught their eye to really
okay,
focus and look at what's going on. I have author Hillel Levin, the author of Submerged, How a Cold Case Condemned an Innocent Man to Hide a Family's Darkest Secret. This is a roller coaster of a story, guys. So stick with us. We'll be right back after the break.
It's the holiday season, a time of giving, receiving, and maybe even answering life's most mysterious questions. What better way to bring joy and clarity to yourself or a loved one than with Love and Lotus Tarot readings by Winnie Schrader? This December, give the gift of insight, empowerment, and a little holiday magic. Because when you buy one tarot reading, you get one free. That's right, buy one, get one free all month long. Whether you're curious about the past, seeking answers in the present, or wondering what's in store for the future, Winnie's loving, empathetic, and accurate tarot readings are the perfect way to connect with what matters most. Choose a cozy phone reading or a face-to-face video session. Perfect for this festive time of year. Visit www.paranormal60.com and click the Love and Lotus tab to learn more and book your readings. Again, that's www.paranormal60.com. Click the Love and Lotus tab. This December, the best gift is to give and receive with Love and Lotus Tarot readings by Winnie Schrader. Don't wait. Book your readings today and make this season truly magical.
Okay, and we're back from the break. I have author Hillel Levin, the author of Submerged, How a Cold Case Condemned an Innocent Man to Hide a Family's Darkest Secret. Now, before the break, we were kind of alluding to an eyewitness, a remarkable eyewitness, which are very hard to come by
yeah,
because of the situation that they're in. Like you said, trauma puts people in the shock. Their, memory could be kind of skewed. So
oh
what
yeah.
did
So this is
what
why it's so significant. Is
okay,
you know they did ultimately have a grand jury 5 years later,
okay,
but they needed a new, what they call a prosecuting attorney for that county. The older prosecuting attorney um, kept saying, "Well, I can't do anything yet because we don't know what really killed her. We have these gaps where we can't really connect this brother-in-law, who we all suspect did it, with her
right.
car or her body that night." And he had a helper. He had an accomplice. And
He
again, in my book, for the first time, I identify who that accomplice is. The police never, they had leads, they didn't follow them, but I followed the leads. And I found
Okay,
that accomplice. They knew who his best friend was, Ray's best friend. He was a big fat guy
okay.
and named Charlie Allen. And they interviewed him. They tried to push him in a corner. And Charlie was definitely a part of the murder conspiracy to kill Rayna. Definitely.
Okay.
But people did not see this big fat guy. They saw a skinny guy who was tall and had stringy blonde hair, but was very thin. And one of the witnesses who drove by during that confrontation thought he was wearing football pants and, bright
Hmm.
at the top and then cut off around the knees where he had tights on and
Yeah.
would swear this guy was wearing football pants. But that the description of the body, tall and skinny, really another thing that totally befuddled the police. And
Right.
when when that spotted car was on the street that was perpendicular to the animal hospital, a couple of guys were loading equipment onto a van. They were in a band and they were going to a gig, and they were like, "What is this guy doing, hanging out on our street?" They were like,
Mhm.
they were thinking, when we leave, is he going to break into our house? So one of them walked up to the car to see, who is it? What is this about? And the
Yeah.
person who got out of the car was that people would look at Ray, who is not in any way Hispanic, but they would say he was Mexican. He was kind of had like a muscular wrestler's body, kind of a
Okay.
Fu Manchu mustache, but he was like 5'10". This guy who gets out of the car is tall and skinny. And when the police later found out about this guy who came so close to the car, and then someone got out of the car, they kept showing him Ray's picture, and he keeps saying, "No, no, no, he was thinner, thinner." So
Really?
this person, yeah, this person was his name was Scott Scarborough, and he was someone who grew up with Ray. Um, Very hardworking guy. He was a tree trimmer. He and
Okay.
Ray's best friend for a while worked for the same tree trimming company where they would, cut down trees hanging over utility wires, that kind of thing. Very
Okay.
wiry, very strong, but a guy who was just a horrendous domestic abuser. And he would get drunk, would beat women, um, horribly.
Yeah.
I met a couple of those women, and actually, he died on his way to killing one because she swore out. She uh, brought charges against him in the hospital where he put her. And when he
Mhm.
found out there was an arrest warrant, he was going to got on his motorcycle, was going to go and kill her. A policeman tried to intervene, and while he was trying to elude the police, he wiped out on the motorcycle. And he was drunk, but very nice guy, right?
Mhm.
So, what tree trimmers wear are chaps,
Mhm.
so that as you're cutting the limbs, they won't come back and tear your pants up or scratch
Yeah.
the bottom of your legs. So this guy from afar actually saw someone wearing chaps, tree trimming chaps over
Okay.
his pants. Um, but he was 6'2", about 150 pounds, how skinny he was. Ray was 5'10" and about 180.
Okay.
And there was a police report that night, about a half hour after Rayna's abduction. He saw on the side of the road Rayna's car. He didn't describe what the spotted car was, kind of a bizarre Datsun station wagon that there weren't a lot of. But he said it was a
Okay.
Nova, which was really a very similar kind of car. And he got
Yeah.
the color right. And then down the road, he saw that pickup, and he knew exactly what kind of pickup it was because he used to have that pickup. He owned
Okay.
that. And it was called an S10, a smaller Chevy pickup. And others had identified that pickup of like the size of a Ford Ranger, which was Ford's version of a smaller pickup. So
Yep.
this guy, and he was driving 30 to 40 miles an hour down this state highway, and he saw these things, and he got Ray and the accomplice within an inch of their heights and a couple of pounds of their weight. Wow. And that was always sitting there. And the police did not see that report.
How could they not follow that lead? That is
Yeah.
like and, like, looking at this case, and it was like, I don't understand why they would try and, uh
And so you say, who gave that lead? This was a guy, he was a young engineer.
uh-huh.
He died, unfortunately, in 2017, um, in his late 50s, or early 60s. He ended up rising to the top of Raytheon, which is, one of the major defense contractors in America, their Indianapolis office. So this
Mhm.
guy was, and I talked to his daughter, and she just said he was a remarkable person. and with incredible skills of observation, which is probably why he rose so high in
Yeah.
engineering. But a guy who liked cars and trucks. So when he described something, he knew what he was talking about. So they could have placed Ray. Um, there are a couple of other witness descriptions that would have worked out as well. But again, they never figured out that apprentice part. I mean, that
Mhm.
accomplice part. And I
Yeah.
did show a picture of Scarborough to the man who came within inches of him. And all these years later, he emailed me back and said, "This is haunting.
Oh.
This was the guy." Okay. Now,
Oh.
on Rayna's the Letterman jacket, which never got into the lake, by the way, there's DNA that
Okay.
was an unknown male, not
Okay.
Jason, not Ray. And same on her purse because she carried a lot of cash in case she had an emergency. She was that kind of a kid. And
Oh,
someone
wow.
got that cash out of her purse, which they left the purse in the front seat of the abandoned car, and there's
Mhm.
unknown male DNA there. So I believe that that would match Scarborough's has four different children by four
Mhm.
different women he didn't marry, but we know who they are. I believe that they could provide a DNA match on that to
Right.
definitively connect him. But I think there's more than enough to connect him to the murder as it is. So
Mhm.
that was one of the things that held off. Reason they held off was they couldn't figure out the accomplice. They felt they couldn't place Ray in all the different places, but most of all, they had to deal with the family. And the family fought them tooth and nail. The father hired his own investigators to show someone else did it. And the only other person I used to mention was Jason, um, because they couldn't say anyone else. She would get in a car with anyone else. But Jason had
Right.
alibis. And Jason was on the other side of town in a trailer park, and he had the friends who drove him there. He had the people at the trailer park who met him there. So he was quickly eliminated. And unlike Ray, he never changed his alibi. It was always, I was there. Now, did he know the exact time he was there? Was it
Mhm.
10 6? Was it 10 after 6? Did the police always take that information down? It didn't matter. She was abducted at 6:10. The car was abandoned at 9 miles away at 7. There was no way he could have gone back to the other side of town, whether he got there at 10 of 6 or 10 after 6. It was
Right.
impossible for him to participate. So he was quickly eliminated as a suspect. So finally, they did have trace evidence, fibers.
Mhm.
And, people have trouble believing fiber evidence is
Yeah.
real. Why are fibers sticking to you now when you go through the whole day? What happens to those fibers? But the FBI analyst was a guy named Doug Diedrich. And the people who
Okay.
remember the O.J. Simpson trial, he was
Mhm.
the prosecution's like one of their best witnesses. The defense attorneys could not shake him. And he
Yeah.
really educated the American public about trace evidence, fibers.
Yep.
And everyone remembered that Ray was a big hunter. And in the back of that spotted car, he used to have this green blanket. When he killed a deer, he would put the deer carcass in that blanket. Uh,
Okay.
and all over Raina's hair, even after she was pulled from the pond, were green fibers. And there were green fibers in her car. Um, so that was very connective. And then as well, they found hair samples under the steering wheel of her car, which Ray said he never drove, but right under the steering wheel that matched his hair samples. Now, in those days, they could not connect hair to DNA.
Yeah.
Today, with roots, they can.
Mhm.
So when Jason went on trial in 2014, it was available. His lawyers never looked into it. So, but now we're talking in 1998. So they
Yeah.
have a motive. They have the friends saying how much uh, Rayna's sister and Ray hated her for getting him in trouble, you know, back in when she was molested.
Yeah.
And they have the fight with the sister. At one point, they bought a stun gun after that fight, but a stun gun wasn't going to be lethal enough, and they had no trouble turning that stun gun over. But between
Yeah.
Ray's activity, which they say is shows consciousness of guilt in terms of the motive, in terms of what all the friends said, they could go before a grand jury. In other words, they took
Hmm.
6 people, put them on a panel, presented all the evidence over a month. These people heard from 70 witnesses. This
Wow.
wasn't any knee jerk thing. And they come up with an indictment for Ray. And the day he was indicted, he was put in jail and he was never released until a year late and a half later. Well, until a year later, about.
Okay.
And there's a new prosecutor. So a
Okay.
woman was elected the prosecuting attorney, and she decided before her term ended, she just wanted to push this case further. So she convened that grand jury, and
Okay.
then she loses the election. And who does she lose the election to? A prosecutor she fired.
Oh.
And when she fired him, he let the whole world know she ruined his life. She put him in financial straits. And then he decides to run against her when she runs for reelection. Everybody said this is a vendetta. And he
Yeah.
wins. He barely wins. And it takes him a few months. But the two cases that were the hallmark of her tenure, the two prosecutions, he drops
Hmm.
the charges. So now Ray is released from prison,
Oh my gosh. Are you
never
serious?
goes to trial, never goes to trial. Despite all the evidence, all the witnesses, all the hundreds of thousands of dollars they spent on the investigation. And when this prosecuting attorney, dropped the charges, did he call the prosecutor who ran the case in the grand jury? Did he call the highly respected state trooper who oversaw that investigation and who believed Ray
Hmm.
did it? No. He didn't ask any of the people in the investigation. He just dropped the charges. So now Ray is out.
Oh my god. That is so disheartening and
Yeah,
scary to think that, like, what reason would they drop this guy admitted
well,
to
he never.
molesting
Okay,
children.
this is really important. He never gave a reason other than to say I didn't have enough to go to the jury, to go to a jury trial, not a grand jury, but a jury trial. I never had enough. And he would kind of
Oh.
say, well, just like that original prosecutor who made such a big deal out of the fact they couldn't spot Ray in all the different places that night. They didn't know how she died. They didn't know who helped him. He kind of would refer to that, but not in anywhere near the specifics I've just given you. He just kind of would lean on, look, I'm not the only guy who didn't think there was a case. The previous prosecutor, to the woman who convened the grand jury, he too believed he didn't have enough. So
Wow.
there you have it. Now, what I figured out was how he killed her.
Okay.
So people want to read the book. This is a real
Yes.
big spoiler, right?
Yeah, well, we don't want it to give too much away because we do want the listeners to
Okay.
get your book,
All
but,
right. So
uh
I'm not going to tell you. I am going to tell you the only way I figured it out was because I had written about a serial killer. So it just jumped off the page to me as soon as
wow,
I
can you
I
tell us
saw
what
the
serial
autopsy.
killer?
Huh?
Can you tell us what serial killer you
His
were
name was
looking
Larry
into?
Hall.
Larry
So
Hall?
the
Okay.
the TV series called Blackbird
Yeah.
on Apple TV, that's the guy I wrote about. So
Oh, okay. So
that series is based on a book I wrote called In with the Devil.
yeah, and that was about an undercover mission to crack a
Yes.
serial killer was he in federal prison or is that why?
Yeah, he
Okay.
was in
Got it.
prison. He had his case was overturned, and they were afraid he was going to win another. If they went back to trial, he would win again.
Okay.
And they believed that he had killed a second young woman, not the one who was a victim of that trial, and that was the one they really wanted to have him confess to. And Jimmy Keene, Taron Egerton in that show, um, his job was to befriend. They were in this bizarre prison that's not used for this anymore in Missouri, where they put all the psychiatric and surgical prisoners, and they wanted him to befriend the serial killer, not only get him to confess, but get him to say where he buried her body.
Wow, that's
And if
amazing.
he would have gotten that, they would let him out. He was a drug
Wow.
dealer.
Yeah,
So, so
I'm
that
definitely gonna
that's why
have to have you on for that book.
I had that expertise.
Yeah.
That was kind of bizarre. So now the years pass,
Okay.
and that prosecutor dropped the charges. He always said, I'll find somebody, doesn't. So now it's 2008. Okay. So she was 15 years later. And they have a, this plan where they're distributing playing cards to all the prisoners in Indiana. And,
Okay.
and instead of like the King of Hearts or the Queen of Spades, they have a real person on the card who's been the victim of an unsolved homicide. And one of those cards was Rayna Rison. And
Oh.
in the local newspaper, the South Bend Tribune, there's an article saying that if a prisoner is to see that card and provide information about someone on that card, like Rayna Rison, they could have their sentence reduced. So in
Okay.
prison, reading this article, is this guy. I've written, by the way, about organized crime and
Mhm.
hitmen. This is about one of the most despicable characters I've ever written about.
Oh,
And he had committed a murder. Okay.
okay.
You would know what that murder was about if you had read the local papers. His name was Ricky Hammonds. And
Okay.
I'm going to jump to the chase here, but Ricky Hammonds was 21 at this point. And the
Okay.
newspapers would have you believe that Ricky killed his roommate. And in some of the articles would say he did it because the roommate raped him. It was a homosexual rape. You
Okay.
saw that in a couple of the articles. Okay. The name of the victim was Daniel Cassidy.
Okay.
His given name at birth was Danny Gemiolo, I think is how they pronounced it. Why didn't he have that name? Because when Danny was 4 years old, his father shot his mother to death after she had come to pick up the car. She had separated the kids in her car. Danny was in the
Mhm.
back seat with his little sister in the child seat, and he looked out the window, saw his father take a gun and shoot his mother to death. So this Gemiolo also only went to prison for 9 years. He said he was drinking, and everyone thinks Indiana's such a tough state. He only got
Right.
years for manslaughter. And then 25 years later, he killed his second wife with a baseball bat. Okay, so that's
Oh,
Danny's father. So
mm,
Danny is raised by his mother's parents, and their names are Cassidy. And he takes their
okay.
name as Cassidy. He goes into the Marines. He's a very obviously mature, serious guy in some ways. In other ways, he could be pretty fun loving. And he gets out, and his grandfather had sold cars, and he convinces him this is a business for you. And he introduces him to a manager of one of the biggest dealerships, the sales manager. And Danny like takes to it like a duck to water. He sells more
Hmm.
than 100 cars the first year he's there. And he's about to, they want him to climb the ranks. And as he's running to give keys to a customer, he gets hit by a hit and run driver. And then
Okay.
he thinks, I'm going to go back to school. Maybe this isn't for me. He gets into Purdue. I mean, that shows you how bright he is. Uh,
Yeah.
and he announces to the owner of the dealership and the sales manager, I'm going to go back to school. And they said, no, we don't want you to leave. Here's a check for $5,000. Here's a raise. And Danny says, look, I can't back out because when I got into Purdue, my cousin goes there and his friend, and I said, "Look, I don't want to live in a dorm. I'm too old for that. Let's get a nice apartment off campus, and I'll pay
Oh,
half the rent." And they can't now go back to the dorm. I can't leave
okay.
them in the lurch. So the owner of the dealership said, "All right, keep paying your rent. We'll let you live in a house for free." We're building a superstore. We're gonna knock this house down. It's on a corner of the parking lot, and you can stay in the house. It's partly furnished, and just keep it neat and clean. So now
Hmm.
his cousin, who's going to Purdue, says, "Danny, I've got a friend. His parents just threw him out of the house. He doesn't have a job. That's Hammonds. That's Ricky Hammonds, not his
Hmm.
roommate." Danny was his landlord. He was his Danny just didn't say, "Come to this house and live for free if you help me keep it clean." He said, I'll get you a job at the dealership that my cousin had.
Yeah.
He didn't have a car. Danny went to the bank who knew him and he said, "Would
Hmm.
you give this guy a loan? I'll vouch for him." He gets him a car.
Wow.
He's his benefactor. Danny goes to visit his fiance while he's away. Ricky Hammonds has a wild party. They put holes in the wall. Even though Danny got him his own car, he drives Danny's car with his giant mutt. The mutt tears all the leather in the upholstery off the
Oh,
car. And when Danny comes back, there's like $1,500 of damage between the house and the car. And it's like, you owed me this money. Throws him out. He quits his job, and Danny's like, "I don't care. You're gonna pay me that money you owe me." He takes the mother had Ricky Hammond's mother had given him a bedroom set. Danny said, "I'm gonna hold this hostage till you repay
hmm.
me." Ricky Hammonds shoots Danny to death. Gets him out on a country road. First shoots him 3 times in the chest, then empties the gun in his face at close range.
Oh, God.
Okay. And so the police go to uh, he first he doesn't even know Danny's dead, and that's, oh my God, you're telling me my friend is dead, and he's all mopey. And then bit by bit they find out he had this pistol his father got for his kids, finds out his sister gave him the bullets, and at one point they're talking to the sister, and they're saying, he's telling us that the mafia is running the dealership and they were somehow behind Danny's death. And the sister says, "Oh, my brother Ricky, you should know he's a pathological liar." This is her telling them in a taped interview that I have the transcript for. She calls him a pathological liar. So he comes up with a story out of Scarface. Well, took me at gunpoint, made me get in the car. Then they took Danny at gunpoint. Then they took us to that country road. And then we got out of the car and they handed me the gun and they said, either you kill Danny because he owes us money for drugs, or or we'll have him kill you. And
Yeah.
the police are like so outraged. They like get him in the car, they take him to the road, and they said, okay, reenact your little scene. And they put it on videotape. I have that videotape
Oh
of him
my
doing
God. So you
all
had
of
to
it.
act it out.
Okay, so why am I telling you all this stuff about Ricky Hammonds? He is the star witness against Jason Tibbs.
How is he connected with Jason Tibbs? Now, Jason Tibbs, that was the childhood friend that
Yeah. Okay.
Rayna grew up with.
And who the family would always point to, like, oh no, it's not Ray, it's Jason.
Yeah, it
So
seemed like Jason was a sweet kid and he got along with Rayna. I don't understand why they're
yeah,
trying to
because they needed
pin him.
somebody to point the finger to. So the story would be, oh, he loved her so much, he wanted her to come back. And they found the love letter that he wrote
Uh-huh.
her. But they also found a love letter that Matt wrote her. Both of
Yeah.
them really loved her. And when it looked
Mhm.
like, both letters were equally ardent. Both letters did not have threats of any kind. They were just,
Mhm.
teenage love letters. So anyway, Hammonds knew about the family fingering him. His mother actually knew Jason's mother, and they
Okay.
raised dogs. They both raised dogs. So this is Ricky's story. He's 14. He's up above the kennels where they raise. He called it a loft. This was in a pole barn, something people know
Okay.
about in the Midwest. Not really a big old barn, kind of, not that high. So, I
Yeah.
mean, literally, this space he claimed he was in may have been 3 or 4 feet high. Then he says, I'm up there, I'm smoking dope, I'm reading a Playboy magazine, and a car backs into the pole barn. And Jason gets out of the passenger side. My sister's boyfriend gets out of the driver's seat. They open the trunk, and in the trunk is Rayna's dead body.
Huh.
And Jason and my sister's boyfriend is yelling, "What the f did you do?" and blah blah blah.
Hmm.
And then they're just sitting around wondering what they're going to do, and they're going to grab. And he claims, meanwhile, he's up smoking dope that they don't smell. And I told
Right.
you
That's
when she was
strong.
abducted, this is like at 6:10, and um, the light by then, and this is several miles away, would have
Uh-huh.
been dark. And he's saying, no,
Right.
no, there was enough light around. It was like 5 or 4:30, and I could see in the car. And by this time, these two cops who are interviewing him, one is a state trooper, the other's from Michigan City, they don't know the details of the crime. But as far
Yeah.
as they're concerned, we're going to solve this cold case. We've found the missing witness here. And one of those cops had been in every step of the way of the Danny Cassidy investigation, knew him
Okay.
to be a liar, knew him to be a grandstander. He at one point attacked one of the detectives, knew everything about this guy, and yet let him stand back and make these charges that are kind of outlandish on the face of it
Right.
against Jason. But he charged the boyfriend. So now by 2008, the boyfriend is in South Carolina, and he has a
Okay.
habit of, going to places, living with girlfriends, and then meeting someone else and breaking up with a girlfriend and living with that new woman. So he's on a couple of different women, a couple of different places he's living in. And in 2008, they call him in, and it's like, I don't know this. I don't know any of this. And they're like, did
Yeah.
you open the trunk? Did you used to drive that car? He said, yeah, I used to drive that car. Sometimes he even got in an accident while he was driving that car. But the boyfriend is like, I don't think I ever opened the trunk of that car. And I'm like, fine, we just know you want to be helpful to us. But the lawyer from Laporte
Okay.
has been advising him. By the way, the same lawyer who had advised Ricky Hammonds says to him,
Okay.
well, go ahead, take a lie detector test. It can't hurt. And the boyfriend takes a lie detector test. And I don't know if you guys have covered this, but 25% or more of all the people who take lie detector tests get a false reading.
Right.
Usually
Because
a
you're
false.
nervous.
Yeah,
It's
you're nervous. Yeah, it's a
hmm
horrible experience. And he fails. I mean, no lawyer in his right mind would ever tell a client. I to this day, how could you tell a client take one of these funky lie detector tests? You don't know who's administering
unreliable
it.
test that might put you away for life.
Yeah, I mean,
Oh,
there are good people who know how to administer them. Again,
yeah.
it's still not, you know, ever going to be
Yeah.
100%. But he didn't even know who was doing it. How could he advise him to take it? So he fails it.
Right.
But in 2008, all they have is Ricky.
Uh,
Um, but now there's another cop involved who has a vendetta against Jason because he tried to charge Jason with these crazy charges that Jason had a job at the foundry. He quickly rose up the ranks to become management. And he had a good friend whose wife worked there, and he and some other friends saw she was having an affair with another
mhm.
coworker, and they told that friend, and they got a divorce. And in revenge, this woman told management that told the police that Jason and his buddy were stealing nickel, these huge amounts of nickel from the foundry.
Uh,
And it was a ridiculous charge. The charges were ultimately dropped, but this young detective, when he found out about this charge against Jason, he decides, I'm going to become the lead detective on this. And just with tunnel vision, tries to find every bit of evidence he can to muster against Jason. And basically, the root of it is this Ricky Hammond story. And they go
yeah.
back in 2013, they go back to that boyfriend. He's now had another divorce. He's lost his house. He doesn't even have money for a lawyer to represent him uh, when he loses in his foreclosure or his divorce. So he's very
Yeah.
vulnerable. And guess who's now advising him? Ricky Hammond's old lawyer,
Of
uh,
course.
who's probably being paid by the Hammonds family. So that's the
Oh.
root of the trial. The pathological liar is a star witness. And the cherry on top of this whole thing is I've
hmm
written a lot about police misconduct.
Yeah.
And you always wonder, how do people get coerced into a false confession? Well, they go to the boyfriend and they say, look, you've been fingered as a potential accomplice
hmm
to a murder, but we'll give you immunity if you testify to helping out in this murder. And
hmm
everything you testify to, we cannot try you for.
Yep.
So they give him this immunity. The prosecutor goes all the way to South Carolina. The chief deputy who's going to argue the case in court, he gives him the immunity. Then he walks out of the room and he lets these two cops interview, interrogate, in fact, indoctrinate the boyfriend. It turns out when you read this transcript, he doesn't know anything about the crime.
Right.
He doesn't know how she was submerged in the water. He doesn't know when she was picked up. He doesn't know how she got there, but they keep feeding him this information.
Yeah.
And at the very top, I go, you to me, this is like one of the most remarkable. First of all, they take 3.5 hours to do it. It's 140 pages. But at
Wow.
the top of this, let me all I say need to say no more than this. at the very top of that transcript, they say, okay, so what car were you driving? And he goes, well, my grandfather's right to that. And they're like, no, 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 no. It was the gray Buick, that the sister owned. And he says, no, that Buick was broken down. It was in the pole barn. You couldn't drive it. And the cops were like, no, you're mistaken. And he's like, no, you can't drive that car.
Oh my
It's driving my
gosh.
grandfather's car. And he wasn't even living with the family at that. So right from the top of the interview, the whole story falls apart. But then they just will say, look, we know. Are you going to cooperate? Are you going to be on our team? Or are you going to roll the dice that you won't get convicted for this crime? They never said it in so many more words, but they kept saying, are you going to roll the dice? Which is something I think the prosecutor must have said to him before he left the room. And ultimately, he lets them do it, but he throws in a few other things that are false that make the story totally ridiculous in terms of the places they stop and where he claimed Jason killed her. But how does he say Jason killed her? On the side of the road, he beat her and strangled her and knocked her head against the pavement.
And that's what killed her.
And remember the autopsy we talked about?
Yep. There was no signs
of strangulation or beating. But that forensic pathologist gets up on the stand and he's like, well, maybe some of this was washed away by but he still couldn't help but say minor bruises were washed
minor, yeah. Yeah, and there's been other cases too where, you also have to keep in consideration when a body is out in the elements. Animals get to
Sure.
The sun, the rain, the snow, but being submerged in cold water probably did preserve a lot of.
She was all preserved. She was
Yeah.
definitely there was none of that. And again, this wasn't a real pond, so she didn't even have the typical water organisms, that often play a part in decomposition too.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for coming on and shedding some light on this case. I mean, this case is a roller coaster, and it's just like it just keeps going and spinning. But I have author Hillel Levin, who wrote the book Submerged: How a Cold Case Condemned an Innocent Man to Hide a Family's Darkest Secret. I'll have a link for today's book in our description, and please rate and review these books. It helps these books get seen more. And it helps the authors.
And thanks, Winnie. And we said even before we started, there's a lot of stuff on the internet that's false. You can't go on the internet and look at any of it and believe you are finding out about this case.
Right. So if you want to know,
and if I'm wrong, I'll give you your money back for my book.
If you guys really want to know the truth and all the connections and really follow a map of how this case is laid out, get the book Submerged: How a Cold Case Condemned an Innocent Man to Hide a Family's Darkest Secret, written by my guest Hillel Levin. So thank you so much. And is there a website that people can go to check out all your books?
Our website is submergedtruecrime.com.
Perfect. And I'll have a link for that in today's description as well. Well, thank you so much, and I hope to see you all next week. Thank you for joining me for another episode of Mysteries, Mayhem, and Merlot. And until our next case, my armchair detectives, stay safe, stay vigilant, and stay aware. I'll see you right here next week on Mysteries, Mayhem, and Merlot.